Hello everyone, Father Brett here. Welcome to Sermon Prep. This week we're looking forward to the 5th Sunday of Easter in Year B. Wow, these Easter days are rushing by now, aren't they? So don't miss out on the opportunity to celebrate and to rejoice. We've got reason to rejoice. We are disciples of the risen Jesus. He is with us, alive, present, helping us, guiding us. And so it is still Easter time and a time for our alleluias to be heard in our world. So let's not lose hope. Let's not get into some sort of dreary rut. It is still Easter time, the 5th Sunday of Easter. This Sunday we hear the wonderful gospel story of the vine. I am the vine, you are my branches. That speaks to us of community, of connectedness, of relationship. And that's really powerful for us to hear at this time in our parish as we are looking at the different strategic areas, strategic priorities in our parish pastoral plan. Last Sunday we looked at community. This Sunday and for the week following we will look at discipleship. The image of the vine speaks to both those strategic priorities, community and discipleship. So let's dive in and have a look at the readings, shall we? The first reading is from the Acts of the Apostles, and that shouldn't surprise us. Throughout these Easter days, the first reading is traditionally taken from the Acts of the Apostles, that first early community. So, Acts of the Apostles, chapter 29, verses 26 to 31. Our psalm is Psalm 22. And the second reading continues our first letter of St. John, chapter 3, verses 18 to 24. And the gospel is, of course, from St. John's Gospel, chapter 15, verses 1 to 8. This wonderful I am the vine, you are the branches, the image of the vine, of the vineyard, is not something new in scriptures. If we go to the Old Testament, especially the prophet Jeremiah, as well as the prophet Isaiah, this image of the vine or the vineyard comes up a couple of times, and it's a really powerful image. All of us remember the 5th chapter of the prophet Isaiah, about the vineyard and the tenants who refuse to give up the produce, and the owner sends representatives and even his own son to get the produce. We know of that story. It's a story we're very familiar with. So Jesus, in teaching his disciples, the apostles, he's going back to an image they would have been familiar with. It's an image we're familiar with. St. John makes it very clear that Jesus is connected to God the Father. God the Son and God the Father are intimately connected with one another. And that connectedness is replicated. Jesus and his disciples, they are intimately connected to one another. They should be intimately, closely connected with one another. And it is that connectedness, St. John makes clear, that leads to fruitful discipleship. If we are to be effective, fruitful disciples, we need to remain connected to Jesus Christ. Perhaps for many of us that may sound rather familiar. Of course, how can we be disciples if we're not connected to Jesus? What a silly thought. But how often are we not connected? How often do we let our connectedness with Jesus grow a little bit thin? And so the fact that St. John doesn't only talk about fruitfulness, he also talks about death and pruning. That's the reason, because sometimes we do wither, we do grow a little bit old and dry, unproductive, ineffective as disciples. And so we need always to be caring for our relationship with Jesus, our relationship with one another. We should not just take it for granted. And that links into our theme of discipleship for this coming week. We have to be intentional about our discipleship. Discipleship doesn't just happen. We have to work at it. And sometimes it's really hard work. Sometimes it's not all that pleasant. Sometimes we get it wrong and we have to find our way back. Dear friends, it's very, very important that we consider what it means personally for me to follow Jesus Christ, to commit my life to him, and what Jesus Christ asks me to do for him, for his community, for the spread of the gospel. And this image of the vine makes that quite clear, I think. So, community connectedness with Jesus Christ primarily, but also with one another. If we look at the first reading, it's about St. Paul coming into the community, the church, the early church. We remember, don't we, that Paul persecuted the church when he was Saul. And so now he's had his conversion experience on the way to Damascus. And not everybody in the church is convinced that this is a genuine conversion. Perhaps he's just using this story to get into the church so that he can persecute them even further. And so they are weary. The Christian community is weary of St. Paul. And so he's battling to find a place in the community, to be a disciple with other disciples. And not only that, now his Jewish brothers and sisters, they are going to be persecuting him more and more because he's abandoned them. He's gone over to the enemy. And so Paul is sort of between two communities here, and he's feeling very uncomfortable. That reminds us that community is not always easy. We will have disagreements. We will perhaps not always trust one another fully. We perhaps won't always get things right and say the right thing. Community is difficult, and that's why there needs to be a bit of pruning, of getting rid of the things that perhaps we did wrong in the past, and also work at building trust, building connectedness. And so the challenge that St. Paul is facing as he becomes a new Christian in this community are challenges and difficulties we all face, and of which St. John, writing his gospel, is aware of too. If you look at the second reading from the first letter of St. John, we see what the vital ingredient is to community, to our relationship with Jesus Christ. Love. Love is the secret ingredient, the magic ingredient. When we love one another, we are able to connect. When we love Jesus Christ, not just know Jesus, when we love him, when we are in a personal relationship with him, then community and connectedness and engagement and relationship, those things are all possible. But what is love? St. John, writing his letter, makes it very clear. It's not just words. It's not just speech, but it is deed. We have to, in our loving, show others by our deeds. That's when true love is visible. Because in many ways, that's the truth of what's deep inside of us, isn't it? We can say nice things with our fingers crossed behind our back, wink, wink, wink. You know, it's easy to just sprout things. It's a different matter to live those things authentically, to live love. It's very difficult to actually be forgiving. It's easy to say, oh, you know, Christians forgive. When it comes down to actually doing it ourselves, it's another story, isn't it? So St. John is saying it is in our deeds that we see the truth of what is in our hearts. Our discipleship must become visible by our actions, by what we do, not only what we say. And again, that fits into what we're looking at in our parish pastoral plan, the strategic plan we are making our way through at this time. We, every single one of us in this parish, have to live our discipleship. It's no good just saying, I'm a Catholic Christian. We have to live that. We have to make it come alive in our world. And as St. Paul discovered, that's not always easy. And so towards the end of the extract of our second reading, St. John gives us a little bit of hope. This is what he writes. All who keep his commandments abide in him, and he in them. So if we strive to live our discipleship, Jesus is with us, and we are with Jesus. Continues, and by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit which he has given us. So we don't do it by ourselves. Sometimes we think we're doing it by ourselves, but we don't. We have the Spirit, and we know that Pentecost is coming. Perhaps sometimes we're a bit critical of the disciples of Jesus. They didn't get what he was on about. They fled when he was crucified. But one can understand their weakness. They were trying to make sense of this and do this by themselves. They hadn't yet received the gift of the Spirit. And it's the Spirit that empowers them to live truly as disciples, to overcome the challenges. And so as we look forward to Pentecost, as we look forward to the assistance that comes to us from God's life living in us, we commit, we strive to remain a community of missionary disciples. So, some thoughts for our preparation for the 5th Sunday of Easter. I hope to see you in person. Otherwise, if masses are all booked up, I hope that you will join us online. And perhaps what you could do is invite someone else, someone you love, someone you care for, who perhaps is not going to Mass. Perhaps you can invite them and join them in discovering once again God's love for them. Invite them to Mass. Invite them to some sort of activity. God bless you now. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.